Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the solo mode for Camp Pinetop from designer Stephen B. Davies and publisher Talon Strikes Games. Camp Pinetop is a game themed around camping, trying to earn merit badges. Let's head over to the table, I'll show you briefly how the solo game plays, then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so here we see a sample solo game setup for Camp Pinetop. And the way you look at setting up this game is by going through the solo scenario book. This is a completely additional book to the standard rule book, and this whole book is strictly devoted to the solo game. And so right now I have this set up for solo scenario 1, which is the first day of camp. All of the multiplayer player boards on the reverse side have solo boards. And so in this case, this is for scenario 2, the snipe hunt, and we've got scenario 4 here and 3, and this is actually for 1 and 8. But what they're going to do is just give you some general information that you need to know in addition to what you'd find in this book on how to set up the particular scenario and what it takes to win. In the case of this introductory scenario, being the first one, you might expect it's a little bit simpler. You have these 4 requirements that you need to complete to be successful before this deck runs out. It says you need to complete 3, you get 3 circle badges, 3 square badges, 3 triangle badges, and 3 of those have to be to their upgraded side. You have to do that before this deck runs out. Now, that deck is talked about during the setup here, where it tells you that you shuffle all the supply cards and discard 25 to the box. So I had already taken 25 cards out of the box, including all of these observation tower cards. 25 cards had gotten removed. Then I took 3 randomly for a starting hand, and I was supposed to remove 9 for a kind of reserve deck, which I've done here. And then you've got a standard draw deck like in the multiplayer game where you've got the deck here in the middle and then 2 on either side. It tells me to set up a 4x3 grid, making sure that at least one of the center cards has the blue triangle there, and I was able to place one of my campers out there. So I just chose to go into the gray wilderness, okay? All of that is set out right here in the setup. Now, there are the same 4 actions as in the multiplayer game with a couple of differences here. So let's just go quickly over the actions. So one thing you can do is draw cards into your hand. There's a hand limit of 5 in this solo game, in this scenario. And so I started with 3, and if I wanted to draw a card, I could just draw 1. I can top deck from here, or I could take 1 from either side, not from the reserve. That would come from a particular badge I might be able to get. So you could draw 1 card. That's slightly different than in the multiplayer game. You could also move by discarding a card. So if I wanted to move from the Gray Wilderness to the Dawn Pass, I could discard any one of these 3 cards and then move there. But again, that's burning through this deck. This is basically a timer. The other thing that you can do is move and earn a badge, which is really what you're wanting to do to fulfill these requirements to be able to win the game. So let's say that I wanted to earn this badge, which is the, I believe, yes, the Orienteering badge, by going from Gray Wilderness to Sebastian's Spot. I'd have to spend those 3 symbols to be able to do that. Well, I've got the pink paddle here. I've got the blue fishing rod, but I don't have that yellow symbol there. However, I've got the Swiss Army knife, which acts as a wild, so I could discard these 3 cards, moving over that badge and gaining it, okay? Now that is the Orienteering badge, and it's going to give me a particular skill. Choose between the badge crossed or the badge directly across. So it allows you to kind of manipulate which one of the badges you might get when you go onto a new location. If I were to go over that symbol again somewhere else, I would move it to the upgraded side, which would give me an upgraded ability. But for the time being, I would place this badge right here, and I got 1 of the 9 badges that I need to complete the game. Now again, I'd have to upgrade 3 of them. So that is moving and earning a badge. You have 3 other campers here that are not out there on the board. Well, how do you get them out? You get them out by discarding symbols of the same type. So let's say now that I have no cards in hand, I drew this card. Then I could draw this card. Actually, I should have drawn probably that one first. And now let's say I draw this card. Okay. Now I've got two of those blue symbols there. I can discard those to place on any of the blue cards. So let's say I placed this camper on the Foxtrot footpath. Okay, so those are the four actions: draw a card, move and discard one, move and earn a badge by discarding the correct symbols that you need, or discard two matching tents to place a new camper. So you will take those four actions, trying to get all of the requirements for the particular scenario before the timer runs out. In this case, this deck of cards. All of these badges are going to give you different abilities as well. Immediately pick up one of your campers and place on any map card. Also, I should mention that one of the things you do in the solo game is these four badges that don't have a color bar on the right. These are solo badges, and these actually replace the multiplayer badges of the same name in whatever player color. I just chose to play as purple, so I removed the purple backpacker and replaced it with the solo backpacker. These are skills that are more applicable to the solo game. So that's the other thing you might do at the beginning during setup to keep in mind. Okay, now in this scenario, there's also what is called expert mode, which is if you win with at least 5 cards remaining in this deck, then you earn the quick learner patch, which is right here. Something that you could then use in a later game, some type of a one-time skill or ability that will help you in future games. And so if you're able to complete this first solo scenario the first day of camp, then you can move on to the second solo scenario, which is the snipe hunt. It has a nice little bit of story here. Any changes in setup, the expert mode for that one, and if there are any differences in actions or in setup, if they want you to put particular cards in particular areas, all of that would be notated here at the beginning of that scenario. And it goes through 8 different solo scenarios. So that gives you a general idea on how the solo game plays. Why don't we head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the solo game for Camp Pinetop plays. This is a game that is relatively simple in nature. The actions you're taking are relatively simple, but as the scenarios go on, more and more is added to the game. So let's talk a little bit about some solo benchmarks that I like to discuss when talking about the solo modes for games. First, I like to talk about the win-loss condition. And in Camp Pinetop, you have a win-loss condition that is based off of particular objectives that you are trying to achieve, usually based on a timer of the deck running out. And so this is a clear win-loss condition. It's not a beat your high score type of variant. And those are usually my favorite types. This is a game that definitely has a puzzly atmosphere to it. It feels puzzly while you're playing it. And oftentimes in those types of games, I don't mind a high score variant, but I really do feel like in this game, it is definitely a plus that you've got a clear win-loss condition. I also like that if you do particularly well, you get kind of this expert badge that helps you to do something else in further games. And so I'm very happy with the win-loss conditions in Camp Pinetop. Second thing I like to talk about is setup and teardown. Oftentimes that can be a determining factor on whether you get a game off the shelf as a solo gamer. And Camp Pinetop has a little bit of a setup. It's manageable. I mean, depending on some scenarios take a little bit more than others, and you do have to kind of make some changes between one scenario to the next. It's not just simply shuffling up a deck of cards and off you go. But overall, it's not a terribly onerous experience to get Camp Pinetop up and playing. It's clear on how you have to set things up, relatively speaking. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment on some rules things, but it's generally speaking not too hard to set up and tear down, especially for the experience that you get out of it. Final thing I'd like to talk about is rules, which I kind of alluded to a moment before. Generally speaking, the rules are quite good. I love the fact that the solo game has its own dedicated book, that solo scenario book, and it also has the differences with the skills and with the actions. I think that is terrific. It really keeps it clear as to which is for the regular game and which is for the solo game. There were a couple of things that I felt like should have been mentioned that were not, mostly about whether you put mastery cards out or not. And that wasn't strictly stated in the rule book. I did hop onto BGG and it was talked about there, but it would have been nice if that was in the rules right from the get-go, so I didn't have to wonder, should I have these cards out or not? But generally speaking, the rules are clear. They do a good job of telling you what you need for each specific scenario, how one scenario may be different from others, different setup things, things along those lines. So overall, a positive for the rule book, especially since it's in its own dedicated book. I think that's fantastic. All right, so my overall solo experience for Camp Pinetop. Well, this is a relatively simple game. It's a family weight game. The theme is one that will probably give you a hint about that. It's got these cute animals, just fantastic art. The components are great. The card quality is fantastic. Screen printed meeples are charming. It's definitely a family weight game. It's very simple to teach and learn, and the solo game is right along with that. It's not a challenging game to learn. It's not a very challenging game to play. I don't know that there's a huge depth of strategy to the game. That is something that you do have to keep in mind, is that there's a fair amount of luck involved. When you've got so much built upon card draw, certainly there's going to be luck involved. However, I felt that as I played more and more, I found some emerging strategies that weren't there the first couple times I played. Specifically in trying to set yourself up in such a way that you're getting those different badges in particular orders. Because oftentimes the order that you get those badges or upgrade those badges can make a huge difference in whether you're successful or not in the game. And that's not necessarily apparent, or at least it wasn't to me in my first couple of plays. So while there is luck involved, and maybe the depth of strategy is not something you'd find in a heavier Euro game, for example, there's still a fair amount of strategy there, and the luck is not overwhelming so that I felt like my games were arbitrary and I won or lost based solely off of card draws. So that is something that I appreciated about the game. In addition to the fantastic art, the wonderful theme, the really nice components, all of that was something I felt was very positive in the game. I liked the way the different scenarios played out. I felt like it was a nice progression. It starts you off very easy, and as things go on, it can get pretty challenging, and you really feel more of that puzzle element where there's maybe a particular way that you need to crack this code. And that's something that for some people might feel a bit constraining. That's something that might even be a negative, is that some of the scenarios more than others felt like there was a particular way that you really had to do it to be successful. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's true because I didn't play every scenario multiple times, so I really couldn't say whether there was a particular way to win or not. I did find that when I was unsuccessful with a particular scenario, I would go back and try to do something slightly different that I felt maybe I wasn't focusing on the first or second time, and that's what made me think that maybe there's a particular way that some of these scenarios kind of need to be done to be successful. So that's something that you should keep in mind. I don't know if there's going to be a tremendous amount of replayability, but I think with 8 scenarios, many of which you are going to have to play multiple times to be successful, at least if you're like me, you will be. I think there's plenty of game here, especially for the small box, the type of family weight game that it is. I think you're getting a good amount of replayability in the game. So all of these things being said, I found Camp Pinetop quite charming. I think it is a really nice game, multiplayer. And as a solo game, I really do feel like they spent the time to make it something that is full and complete, and it did not feel like an afterthought. This really felt like a nice addition to the game, something that I would absolutely buy strictly for a solo experience. All of that being said, I recommend Camp Pinetop. I'm going to be giving it a 7.5 out of 10 and a seal of approval. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.